Ghost of Tsushima was undoubtedly a phenomenal and beautifully crafted game. In honor of the first anniversary of the wonderful Ghost of Tsushima, and at the dawn of Ghost of Tsushima's awesome DLC, the Iki Island Expansion releasing next Friday, I thought it was the perfect time to do a video on Jin Sakai, the great protagonist of Ghost of Tsushima. Today we'll just be analyzing Jin Sakai's character traits, his development over the duration of the game, and overall just why he's such a phenomenal protagonist. Jin Sakai is just a normal samurai, and he was raised like that, and at the start of the game he's rather stoic or reserved and quite a calm individual, aligning directly with the character traits that he had been raised to have to be a true samurai. He was taught to master his emotions, he never gave in to anger or raised his voice, and throughout the game he's shown to us to be an individual who is kind, polite and sympathetic for all of his people in the lands of Tsushima, and he always shows the uttermost levels of appreciation for all those that helped him on his journey. But the Mongol invasion of Tsushima would ultimately change him forever, change him into a completely different person, someone that would see more clearly, see the faults of the way that he'd been raised, and throughout the game he just outright goes against the conventions and teachings he'd been raised to uphold for his entire life. Jin for his entire life had been raised with the conceptions that were associated with the so-called samurai code, and to disobey it was to go against the legacy of his entire clan and his uncle Shimura, who had taught him well to always adhere to the code and to become a true samurai using the code of honor that all samurais needed to have. But then the invasion of his homeland happened, and the entire idea of still trying to uphold the code of honor of the samurais had started to become disillusioned after the samurais were humiliatingly defeated at Komoda Beach and were left on the verge of collapsing, and Jin Sakai himself was also at the verge of death after his face-off with Koten Khan at Castle Kaneda. The Mongols were not honorable soldiers like the samurai had appeared to be. They fought their enemy straight on without any tricks, and stealth was something that was entirely banned from the samurai code. But Jin Sakai realized the faults of the code and was able to see that they wouldn't be able to beat the Mongols using their code, and that they'd eventually perish on the island if they didn't adopt a different style of fighting. But if Jin were to adopt a new style, he would be going against the code, a code that now seemed so fragile, a code that was about to be crushed by the hands of the Mongols. If the code wouldn't allow them to fight their enemies unfairly, how could they possibly fathom winning such a war in which the enemy had used the dirtiest of tricks to beat them? They simply wouldn't. And only Jin Sakai noticed that the Mongols started to use the samurai code of honor against the entirety of Tsushima, and Jin, in response to the growing power of the Mongols, started to adopt his own dirty ways of fighting that wasn't allowed to be used as a samurai, and he knew this, and he was also very hesitant in using such vulgar methods against his enemies, because it would mean that he would have to abandon his honorable ways and adopt something much more sinister. And if the samurai were to find out about his change of heart and code, then he was to be called a traitor, a rebel. But Jin Sakai knew what to do, and he did it. He used the vulgar methods of the Mongols and flipped it against them, using poison, stealth, fire, and all other unfair ways of fighting to kill the Mongols, to ultimately drive them off the island. Sure, this way wasn't allowed as a samurai, and his uncle would rebel against his ideas, but he knew that he would have to commit such deeds for the safety and lives of the people living on Tsushima. The samurai clearly couldn't do much to stop the Mongols, especially when they were stuck in the past, utilizing methods that seemed outdated, and it just wouldn't work against the unpredictable Mongols. The samurai were predictable. They would only fight honorably and fairly, and in turn they would give a gigantic advantage to their enemy, who would manipulate this fault in the samurai ideology and use it to make themselves unpredictable, meaning that the samurai were incidentally useless in stopping the Mongols. Jin became firm in his resolve to stop the Mongols, and he would use any ways of fighting to stop them, especially after witnessing the cruelty of the Mongols and all the damage and suffering they had caused against all those who opposed them. He became willing to do anything for the people of Tsushima to protect his people, but he still had his own sense of honor, one that he'd forged in the rubble of the one that was slowly diminishing from his mind. He still never killed the innocent, and was still an honorable man in the end. Jin started to become a lot more open with his emotions, something which was almost prohibited in the samurai code, and with the help of him adopting his persona of the ghost created by his friend Yuna, he still remained calm and cordial with all his allies. Even after becoming someone that used dirty tricks and unfair ways of fighting against his enemies, Jin still managed to retain a powerful and firm moral compass, and he still frowned and vowed to stop any acts of immorality. Many of these instances of Jin's still honorable and kind nature come out throughout the game, with a few examples being when he called the men of Sago village swine after discovering that they had sold out all their women to the Mongols just for their own lives, and he also threatened Kajiwara after discovering that he had murdered his wife and daughter in the chaos of the Mongol invasion, and he even warned Masako to never try and kill him again after locating Junshin. But the biggest relationship that was explored so much throughout the game was Jin Sakai and his uncle Lord Shimura, who had raised him. Flashbacks to the bond that they had created showed us that they were very close as father and son, and Jin greatly aspired to live up to the expectations of Lord Shimura. Jin held such great respect for his uncle, but that respect that he had for his uncle slowly and gradually diminished through the events of the Mongol invasion, especially when Shimura sent the samurai to die in the Battle of Castle Shimura. He realized that his uncle was enslaved to the concepts and code of the samurai, who had refused to change his idealisms to save his people, and incidentally this led to the loss of all respect that Jin had for his uncle, but he still loved him. Overall, Jin is such a fantastic character. His development from the start of the game up until the very end was such an amazing one to see written out, and I loved every second of his character arc, and he's just such an incredible character. Okay everyone, that's it for today's video. I hope you all thoroughly enjoyed this little rant about how amazing Jin Sakai is. Let me know what you thought about Ghost of Tsushima down below, and what you thought about the fantastically well written Jin Sakai, and whether or not you are excited about the DLC coming up for the game next week. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Peace.